Which structure is the most precise in the ancient world? Is it the pyramids of Giza? These structures are argued to be the pinnacle of ancient precision, a line true north, perhaps built in a way to resemble constellations. Or perhaps Stonehenge, where thousands of people gather every year to see astronomical alignments of these massive stones made almost 5,000 years ago.
But to me, they pale in comparison to the true greatest of all time. Hang on, you know what? The true ghost, the Parthenon.
Hi, I'm Dr. Hugh Thomas. I'm an archaeologist and I have 20 plus years of fieldwork experience, and I also love ancient architecture. Now, obviously I'm playing around a bit. Structures like the pyramids or Stonehenge are really architectural marvels, but for me, my favourite piece of amazing ancient architecture has always been the Parthenon. Whereas other structures are aligned to certain cardinal points or celestial alignments, what makes the Parthenon stand out is that it was designed to counteract optical illusions created by our brain when we look at things like straight lines. But let's get into that in a second. To give a brief summary of the Parthenon, it's found in Athens on the Acropolis, which is the high point of the city. The Parthenon was built during what was called the Periclean building program. It was started in 447 BCE and completed in 438 BCE, although sculptural decoration was added to it over the following years. We know that the structure was designed by two architects called Actinos and Callicrates, and the sculpture was overseen by the famous sculptor Phidias. The temple housed the massive chryselephantine statue of Athena Parthenos. Now, if you've never heard of chryselephantine before, that's statues that are made out of ivory and gold, where ivory is the skin and gold is used for the clothing. Now, almost no chryselephantine statues exist today, although there are fragments of some that have been found at Delphi, and this gives us a really tantalizing glimpse of what this technique would have looked like. But the Athena Parthenos statue was in a whole other ballpark compared to these ones. It stood 13 meters high, and it had 1 to 1.3 tons of gold. We'd really get a great understanding of what it would have looked like by other ancient sculptures that were sort of influenced by the original Athena Parthenos statue, like this one, which is called the Athena Varvakion statue. Now, you can go to Athens in the National Museum and see this, and that's where I was a few weeks ago. Or, alternatively, and this might sound a bit weird, you can go to Nashville in America and see a full recreation of the Parthenon that was built about 130 years ago. But the design of the Parthenon is what is truly special. You see, by this time in human history, people understood that our brain is complex and it can play certain tricks on you. So take this image, for example. Now, it's a bit mind-bending and it looks like a whole mess of curves, but actually, it's just our brain kind of freaking out. Now, we know that people in antiquity knew about optical illusions in structures, and that's not just because of the Parthenon, but also because my boy Vitruvius, who's a Roman writer from the 1st century BCE, wrote a book on architecture, and he wrote in painstaking detail about temple design. Take, for example, this passage.
All the members which are to be above the capitals of the columns should be inclined to the front a 12th part of their own height, for the reason that when we stand in front of them, if two lines are drawn from the eye, one reaching to the bottom of the building and the other to the top, that which reaches to the top will be longer. Hence, as the line of sight to the upper part is the longer, it makes the part look as if it was leaning back. But when the members are inclined to the front, as described above, they will seem to the beholder to be plumb and perpendicular.
So yeah, they built into the design optical refinements so that when you view this temple from a distance, your brain doesn't make it look warped. So Actinos and Callicrates designed the temple to not really have straight lines, but really subtle curves, so that when our brains look at the temple from a distance, it doesn't look, as Vitruvius would put it, thin and mean or swollen and ungraceful. So what were the optical refinements? It starts with the base of the temple, which is known as the stylobate. Now, the stylobate isn't flat. It's actually very slightly curved. So the whole stylobate is actually very slightly convex, with the highest point in the center of the temple and the lowest points in the corners. It has a gradient of about 1 to 450 on the short sides and 1 to 750 along the long sides. This curve is also present in the entablature, which is all of the kind of roofing and sculptures that you can see on the top of the columns. Now, speaking of columns, they also have optical corrections. The first and probably most famous thing is a thing called entasis. Basically, the columns aren't straight. They're slightly tapered, but even then they bulge very, very slightly. This bulge is normally, it changes, but in this case about 2/5 of the way up the column. This stops the columns looking like they were slightly convex when you see them. Now the corner columns have something slightly different going on. They're a little bit thicker than the central columns and they lean diagonally into the center so they can be viewed from all angles. These columns are also slightly closer to the next column by about 60 centimeters. Now, this is all designed to trick your eye because when you're viewing this column straight on, because there's a gap next to it, it's this blue sky, your brain will interpret it to be way too far away from the next column than it actually is. Now, as you can imagine, all of these curves on the top of the stylobate and the columns require the upper part, the entablature of the building, to also have this curve. There are lots of other aspects about the Parthenon that are really fun in terms of ratios and whether there's a golden ratio and how the sculptures are built onto the structure. But one thing my mind comes back to again and again is just how amazing it is that Callicrates and Iktinos not only designed the Parthenon with these optical corrections, but also that they had stonemasons who were able to carry them out. That being said, there are some issues with the Parthenon. For example, the four corners are actually slightly different heights. But if we can overlook that so many people do things like claim that the pyramids are on the 30th parallel, that some ancient mystical line circles the planet, and this 30th parallel is where so many wonderful ancient sites are built, when actually the 30th parallel is up there, I think we can forgive the Parthenon builders for an error of a couple of centimeters. But before I finish today with this video, I just want to clear up one misconception about ancient Greek temples. A lot of people look at them and think that they are these bright white marble structures, but in reality, they were actually richly decorated with colorful pigments. Reds, blues, greens, for example, from pigments that were sourced across the Mediterranean. We can put together a few different types of recreations of ancient Greek temples based off the scientific analysis that has been done, and I'm just highlighting one study here and a couple of different painted recreations. The other thing that we can also do is look at some of the surviving architectural sculpture. Here is an earlier archaic pedimental sculpture, and you can see here just how richly decorated the architectural sculpture actually was. Now you might have noticed that there is a slight difference between this video and my previous ones. I was hoping to record a lot of this stuff whilst I was on the Acropolis, but as you can see from this video, it was just me and my nearest and dearest 8,000 friends, and there was no way that I could do it without 1,000 different tourists interrupting. But that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers.